I was either 10 or 11, living in a small ranch with thick woods in the backyard, and a fair amount of space between houses. There were only two streetlights, one across the street to the left of my house and one all the way at the end of the street where it begins to curve. It was late at night, about 11:30 or 12, and I couldn't sleep. Most of the time, I would sneak a flashlight into my room and read a book under my blankets until my eyes got heavy. But for some reason, it just wasn't working tonight. I was tossing and turning and simply couldn't sleep. Out of sheer boredom, I decided to look across and see if my neighbor across the street was awake as well. When I pulled back my curtain, the first thing I noticed was the silhouette of a man standing across the street, further behind the streetlight. It was quite dark and I really couldn't see his face, but to see someone out so late at night just standing there was unnerving. I looked at him for a few more seconds, but he didn't seem to be moving. I shrugged and thought that maybe something was wrong with their lawn or their plumbing. I went back to my book, but the thought of the stranger standing across the street just wouldn't leave my mind. This time, when I went to look, I shut off my flashlight first and then peeled back my curtains, just enough for me to slightly see outside. When I glanced across the street for the second time, a cold chill slid down my spine. The man had moved, closer to my neighbor across the street. He was now standing near the edge of their driveway on their lawn, where the streetlight illuminated him better. He was slightly hunched over, and his tall frame made him seem even more intimidating. I had to swallow the lump in my throat and quickly ducked out of view, slowly pushing the curtain back in place. At this point, I was beginning to get scared, a dull pit of fear in my stomach. Nothing's wrong, it's just your imagination, I thought to myself, forcing my head back on my pillow and my book back in my drawer. I was only able to stay still for about 5 minutes before I heard the unmistakable sound of branches and leaves cracking, and I jerked out of bed, my hands feeling cold and clammy. It felt like the stranger was right outside of my window, and it was almost like I could feel the pair of cold, lifeless eyes right on me. I bit my bottom lip, and slowly, almost barely moving, moved aside a tiny portion of my curtain and a low whine bubbled out of my throat. The man was on my lawn, at the edge of my street. Seeing him now across the street was horrifying, and I realized that this wasn't my neighbor. It was some freak stranger getting closer and closer to my house. And so I did what every 10-year-old would have done. I ran to my parents' room. My mother and father slept in separate rooms, and this entire week my dad was away at a funeral. So I bolted into my mom's room, only to screech to a halt and drop to my knees when I saw my mom had her blinds cracked. I scrambled across the floor until I was out of visible range and quickly glanced outside one last time, just to make sure that I really wasn't seeing things, and then lurched away from the window. He was now walking down my front yard, moving in a slow, lurching gait, his head still bowed. I slapped at my mom's covers, my voice starting at a whisper and gradually increasing to a small cry. After what seemed like an eternity, my mother woke up, and as soon as I told her what I had seen, she threw the covers aside and pushed apart the blinds, frantically searching the front yard. After a few nerve-wracking moments, she finally looked down at me and said, "There's no one there, honey." I slammed my face against the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and she was right. There was no one there. My mother did call the cops and they swept the front and backyard of my house, but said that there was no trace of anyone ever being there. However, a few nights ago, my neighbors down the street had reported a break-in at around the same time. I was full of unanswered questions. Who was the stranger? Why did he leave and where did he go? And most importantly, Where was he now? Now, almost 6 years later, I can surely say that I've never had such an encounter as that one night. It happened 8 years ago during the summer. A little backstory there. I was at my mom's house, but she barely lived there anymore. She spent most of her time at her boyfriend's, and my sister was very often left alone. I was a student in another city, but I came back at my house during the holidays. I was 19 and my sister was 16 at the time. Our house had 2 floors, a living room and kitchen on the first floor, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor. The kitchen and the living room had 2 door windows opening on a large terrace, and from the terrace you could go into the backyard by some stairs. We didn't really use the ground floor, as it was very dark due to these small windows, and it was basically a garage and an office to do our homework. Like I said, it was summer, very hot, and I had just discovered Game of Thrones and I had 2 seasons to watch. Every evening, I took my laptop, made myself comfortable on the terrace near the kitchen, and watched an episode or 10. My garden was surrounded by a U-shaped building, so you could see very well my terrace and my garden from the balconies. Some working men were there for a couple of days now, and were working late, so I often see them while I watch my series in the evening. They were minding their own business, and so did I, so I didn't think much of it. One morning, I was sleeping late and my sister woke me up whispering, "Wake up, there's a man in the house." I was half naked because of the heavy heat of that summer. I stood up, perfectly awake now, grabbed a shirt and went downstairs, practically running. I know this is a dumb thing to do, a half-naked, helpless young woman, but I'm very protective of my little sister and I didn't feel any fear at this point. I went down to the kitchen and couldn't find a sharp knife, so I took a fork. Absurd, I know. Well, I asked her where she saw him. She told me that she was watching TV in the living room, and because the windows were open, she saw a man in the reflection standing just behind her. She jumped off the couch and finding herself in front of him, a tall man in his late 30s. She had no chance in a fight. The guy had one of his feet on the first step to the second floor, where I was sleeping. She shouted, "Who are you?" He didn't answer and just walked quietly back into the kitchen where the door window was wide open, and took the stairs back to the garden. As soon as I heard that, I ran in the backyard with my harmless weapon, to my gate in front of our garden. I even went into the street looking for him. I'm sure if I would have found him, I wouldn't have been so brave anymore and I might have peed myself. But there was no one. And that's when I saw my computer missing. My sister told me that the guy didn't have anything in his hands when he left. And that was the scariest part because it meant either he was in the house for quite some time before, took the laptop, and came back to do whatever the heck he planned to do, or there was another person in here. I put some decent clothes on and I took my sister to the police station nearby. I was very angry with the policeman. She was a minor, so I stayed with her. She told them everything and described the guy with a lot of details. They asked her if she could recognize him and she said, yeah, without a doubt. They said it would be highly unlikely that they find him, and that you should be thankful that you and your sister weren't hurt. And like she needed to be frightened more than she already was. They wrote in the deposition that she was too shaken up and couldn't recognize the man, even though she had said the contrary multiple times. We never heard from them. When we came back in the house, she was very scared and I was very angry with the loss of my very expensive laptop. I needed it for art school and had all my photos in there, and the attitude of the police. We both sat in the terrace and talked about what had happened, and how lucky we were that she saw that man before he came upstairs. And this is when I noticed that the working men weren't there anymore. From the streets, no one can ever know that we have a backyard, and another entry in the house. My sister told me it was acting like he knew a bit of the house. Maybe it was the first time and we didn't notice, we never know. I'm certain it was one of those men working in the neighbor's balcony who had been watching me that broke in the morning. From that day, we double-locked the doors and slept in the same bed for weeks. This happened when both me and my friend Jay were 15. I was spending the night at his house, as I often did. It was a normal enough night. We watched movies, played a couple of video games, and stayed up way too late. It was about 2 a.m. I think when we heard a loud banging coming from the front door. Luckily at the time we were in his kitchen at the back of the house, so no one could see us. We were spooked because there shouldn't have been anyone at the door at this hour, but we figured it was just some drunk person and that they would go away soon. After 30 seconds, there was more banging on the door and yelling that neither of us could understand. It sounded like an adult man, and he sounded angry, so we were both scared. He texted his mom, who we thought was upstairs, but she said that she had left a bit before without saying anything. She did that often enough. She liked to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, so we didn't pay any attention or notice when she left. We didn't know what to do, as we were scared to call the police based on past experiences with cops in our small town being not the best. At this point, we turned off the kitchen light and were ducked down on the ground. We heard the banging and yelling getting louder, and I decided to see who it was, if it was anyone that we knew. I army crawled through the dining room, which was also dark, and I peeked through the door to the living room, which is where the front door was. There is also a huge window by the door that you can see right into the dining room through, so I was very careful not to be seen. I couldn't see any details of the man, but he looked to be about 6 feet tall and had gray hair. I crawled back to Jay and we quietly decided what to do. We heard the knocking stop, so we decided to wait a bit before seeing if it was safe. We also decided to go under the table in the dining room in case he tried to come around back, which is where the kitchen was. After around 10 minutes of silence, we rock, paper, scissors for to check if he was there, and of course I lost. So I again army crawled to the dining room door. I saw the man staring through the window, hands cupped against the glass, and I made eye contact with him the moment that he saw me, and I loudly said, "Crap," causing my friend to panic and crawl behind me. I saw him pull out his phone. He told me later that he was texting his mom to come home and save us. The man started yelling again, and this time we could make out a bit more of what he said. It was mostly cussing, although I definitely heard the phrase, "I'm going to kill you," in there a couple times. I quickly looked past the man to see if any of the neighbors seemed to notice him, but no such luck. I crawled back out of his sight and again discussed what to do with my friend. We decided to go into the basement for safety, which you could get to by moving the fridge. It's a confusing house, I know, but it was really old and not meant for modern-sized appliances. We pulled out the fridge to get into the basement, feeling mostly safe but still terrified. I start having a panic attack, although I'm trying to hold it together the best that I can for Jay, who was also on the verge of breaking. We hear a gunshot and the shattering of glass above us, and I cover my mouth so I don't scream. Jay and I look at each other terrified. We hear loud footsteps and yelling above us, the man asking where we went. We hear him going upstairs and run around there for a bit. He eventually comes back down and starts turning over furniture, I'm assuming to find us. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Jay's mom pulls into the driveway, which scares the guy as he runs out the back door in the kitchen. Jay and I get out of the basement and run to greet his mom, never happier to see her. She was shocked by the state of the house and hugged us, happy that we were safe and scared by how close we were to being hurt. We were all scared after that. After that night, they had better security installed and we went over a safety protocol if anything ever happened again. Luckily, it hasn't happened again yet, although when I go to his house I'm still scared. And we never called the police because we know there wasn't much that they could even do. We just cleaned up and moved on. This happened a couple of years ago when I was 16. It was a warm summer night. At nights like these, me and my friend would often grab a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of beer each, and go outside to enjoy them. We come from a really small town where everybody is somehow connected, so the only way to drink or smoke without our parents knowing was to do so in secluded places. Luckily, the town is surrounded with huge forests, and we were both very familiar with them since we practically grew up there. This one time, it was a night as usual. We both grabbed our forbidden contraband, some flashlights, and we headed out. We took the path through the long meadow which ended at the edge of the forest. From there led a path through the forest by which it's a 20-minute walk back to town in steep downhill terrain. At the place where the meadow and the forest meet, there is a gazebo with a fireplace where people go for picnics. As we were walking through the meadow, we would stop a few times to ensure from afar that the gazebo was unoccupied. It was around 11 p.m. and the night was incredibly dark. Even though we were out in the open, we had to use our flashlights to see anything. When we made sure that the air was clear, we approached the gazebo to light our first cigarette. We were just standing there, puffing and talking, while always scouting our surroundings with the beams of our flashlights. After maybe 5 minutes, we decided to take the path through the forest back to town. We walked about 30 meters, at which point we couldn't see the place where we were previously standing. That's when we heard it. From the gazebo where we were standing just seconds earlier came a long, terrifying scream. It sounded as if somebody, a man by the sound of it, was being cut to pieces while still very much alive. The kind of scream that turns your blood to ice instantly. After the first scream, there is a pause for a few seconds. During this time, we were both so scared we couldn't even move. And then it started again, even louder and more terrifying. The second scream snapped us back to reality. Without a word, we just started sprinting through the rough terrain, not once looking back. At this point, I was so pumped up with adrenaline that I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat resonating in my ears. We'd never run faster than that, and we didn't stop until we reached the lights of town. When we finally did, we both just sat on a sidewalk under a lamppost, panting and gasping for air. Nobody said anything for a good 30 minutes, until from my friend came a single but quite elegant word. Crap. After a while we started talking about it. We came up with the conclusion that either somebody was having fun at our expense, or somebody got really hurt. At the end, we decided to head back there the first thing in the morning. But surprise, surprise, no signs of anyone being injured or anyone struggling. We decided that it was just someone playing pranks on us. However, to this day, it keeps gnawing at me. Something just doesn't add up. We were standing there for quite some time, so the person must have been very well hidden. On the other hand, it would be almost impossible for anyone to just walk in there without any light since it was so dark. And even if he had some kind of torch, we would certainly spot him. Anyway, screaming man in the forest. Let's not meet. Update. I'm 100% sure that it wasn't an animal. As I previously mentioned, I spent a good portion of my life in those woods, so I am familiar with the local fauna. There is nothing around these parts that could have made that noise. I am absolutely positive it was the scream of a man. At the end of my junior year's spring semester, I moved into a townhouse which I shared with my roommate of 2 years, and a crazy landlady, but that's a story for another day. The washer dryer at the new place were broken, so I decided to go to a local laundromat after class to wash my work clothes and a couple shirts that I had stolen from my boyfriend. I had classes into the evening, so it was around 9 p.m. at the absolute earliest, and I had to take a bus to get there. A tall man who looked to be anywhere in his 30s or 40s approached me as I was waiting for my laundry load to finish. His looks were average but pleasant, and he had a smooth voice, yet something about him immediately set me on edge. He sat down on the bench beside me and started chatting me up even though I had headphones in. I'm really accustomed to being approached by strangers, whether they are asking for directions, randomly telling me their life story, or just being creepy. This was naturally a case of the latter, but even for a stranger hitting on me, he was giving me really weird vibes. He asked if I lived in the apartments across the street, and if I had family in the area. He asked if I was new to town, which made no sense to me as I live in a massive suburb city of DC, so why would anyone recognize anyone? He kept interjecting to say how cute and adorable I was, and to ask my age, guessing that I was either 18 or 19. I was 21 at the time, but people often think that I'm in high school even now. The fact that he was hitting on me while thinking I was still a barely legal teen made it that much creepier. I didn't tell him where I lived or where I was from, and said that I was getting a load of laundry done for my boyfriend real quick. I lied and said that I lived with him, and that he'd be expecting me home soon. The man then proceeded to say that we could still be friends and offer to take me out, or invite me in for dinner. The way he smiled when he said it freaked me out. By now, it had to be at least 10 o'clock, and I was super creeped out, so I firmly said, "No thank you," and I tried to put my headphones back in as obviously as possible. He got up and he disappeared for a while. And then as I transferred my laundry to the dryer, he reappeared and started pacing around the small laundromat, intentionally coming up close behind me. The dryers were located on the back wall of the room, so this made me feel like I was being effectively cut off from the exit. He was strongly built and about 6'3", so he utterly dwarfed me in comparison. I'm only 5'4", and I had been on a break from the gym for most of the semester, so my muscle was rather lacking. As I kept an eye on his reflection, I found myself thinking of every possible route out, and trying to recall the self-defense classes that I had taken back in January until the dryer finished. By the time I was done, he had left. Something in my gut told me not to exit through the main front door, and when I went through the side entrance, I saw him sitting directly in front of the main exit with his driver's side door open and his phone out, as if he was waiting for someone. I called a friend and I booked it to a nearby restaurant where I hid out for at least another hour. I occasionally peeked out of the window to see if he had moved, but he remained there for another 30 minutes. No one ever came to meet him, and a sick feeling in my stomach confirmed my fear that it was me whom he was waiting for. I ordered some Korean fried chicken to go and I called an Uber home. I'm used to having creepy experiences with men, on the metro or when I'm walking down the street, but this felt different than the usual catcalls and following. My body was on high alert and I was so afraid, and embarrassed that I had even gotten myself into that position in the first place. When I got home, I just burst into tears. I never told my boyfriend or my girlfriend about it, and it was months before I ever told my roommate. I recently read a Twitter thread about a girl who almost got trafficked by a guy who was waiting for the subway, and was hit with the realization that my laundromat horror story could have easily been exactly that. At the time, all I could think about was getting away, but now that it's been nearly a year, I realize that this could have easily been a trafficking attempt. I live in a very wealthy DC suburb because of where I go to school, but it is also statistically one of the highest trafficking areas in the country. The way he conducted himself was eerily similar to the other girl's description that I read, and I'm just really thankful that I didn't take that main door. I have no idea what might have happened to me if I did. I've encountered a person that I'll call Window Man that has really messed me up. This happened in the summer of 2018, so about 8 months ago. Some background story to help better understand the situation that I was in, and the layout of the apartment. My mom and I moved into this one-bedroom apartment with one of my mom's colleagues for a short period of time. About 3 months to be able to save up some money for another apartment that we currently live in. So the apartment had a small bathroom and shower, a kitchen merged with the living room, a small room separated by a sliding door and a windowed balcony. We lived on the first floor, and even I, being the short 5'4" girl, managed to climb up into the window when I forgot my keys at home. Anyways, since the colleague needed some privacy, she chose to live in the small room. My mom would sleep on the couch in the living room, and I would sleep on the balcony on a mattress. Now when I would lay on my mattress, from my point of view, I would see the living room and the couch on my right, and the windows on my left, though there was some behind me that I wasn't really able to see. Anyway, now to the actual story. We moved in. Everything was going great for the first month or so. I felt quite safe, even though I was very suspicious from the start of the window since we lived on the first floor. And I should mention that I've never experienced anything paranormal, nor have I had sleep paralysis before. So, one night I wake up, or at least I think so. I can't move. I can only blink my eyes and move my head. I look over to the windows and see what looks like a third of a man's head, and a hand peeking through the window. I tried to scream and get up, but I couldn't move or do anything. I was so terrified. I saw the man slowly closing the window as if he was trying not to make a sound and lowering his head, as if he were leaving. I was freaking out, but I still couldn't move. I saw my mom on my right, sleeping on the couch, and on my left hand was hanging off the mattress and my cat was headbutting it, as if he was trying to wake me up. I tried to scream again a few times, but it doesn't work. I'm hysterical at this point and I feel tears welling up in my eyes. Suddenly, I wake up. I shoot up from my bed. My cat's still next to the mattress and my mom's still on the couch, sleeping in the same position that I've seen her in. I look at the window panicking, and it's locked from the inside, just like I left it before going to sleep. I unlocked it and opened it, making sure that there's nobody outside. I close and lock the window and lay back down, sobbing. I just cried myself to sleep that night. A few days later, I've decided to tell my mom about the dream. I didn't want to at first because I thought that she wouldn't pay much attention to it. But since it had me so on edge, I told her, and just as I expected, she told me that I've been listening to too many horror stories and didn't take me too seriously. After maybe a week, I forgot about the dream and I moved on. And then one evening, everything was going fine. I was preparing myself for the next day since I had to do a big presentation in front of the entire class, and I wanted to look my best. It was about midnight. I took a shower, brushed my teeth, and went to sleep as usual. My mom was still up on her phone, but about to go to sleep too. I doze off peacefully. Suddenly, I wake up for no reason and have the massive urge to look behind me at the windows. To my horror, I saw the tall man in the window, about halfway in, with one leg almost on the floor. I panicked and thought that I was dreaming again, but quickly realized that I can move, so no, I wasn't dreaming. Still being in a state of fear and confusion, I whispered, "What the heck?" And to my complete horror, the man looked up, all dark but eyes shining in the moonlight, and put on the creepiest ear-to-ear grin, put a finger on his lips and said, "Shh," in the most menacing way ever. I had no idea what to say, so I said louder, "What the heck?" And then I jumped up and started screaming like a banshee. The guy got startled and almost fell back, so I took the opportunity and closed and locked the window just as he was about to try to get back in. My screaming woke my mom up and she ran up asking what had happened. I started nervously explaining all that happened, and then we saw the dude climb up to our window again, but the one right next to me trying to open it. As I saw that, I screamed even louder, and as he was opening it, I pushed him and he fell down, calling me every name under the sun. He then tried to make up some crappy excuse, but in a panicked state, I started yelling at him at the top of my lungs to get the heck out. I kept on yelling for about 5 minutes like a total crazy person, until the guy finally said something along the lines of, "Fine then," almost as if I was obliged to let him in, and started walking away. I slammed all the windows shut and locked them, sat down on my mattress and proceeded to sob loudly as my mom was next to me, trying to calm me down. We thought that was it, but a few minutes later I saw him again, climbing up our balcony and started screaming again, opening one of the windows and yelled so loud that I almost lost my voice. I closed and locked the window, and my mom and I went to the guard to tell them what happened. I described the man to him as best as I could, but since it was dark, I couldn't say much about his appearance. He told us just to go home and stay calm, and that he would handle the situation. When we were going back, we saw about 8 neighbors of ours standing outside wondering what had happened. They all gave us sympathetic looks as we went back home. My mom gave me some medicine to help me calm down, and I was crying and shaking vigorously for about an hour, until I was finally so exhausted that I just went to sleep with her, since I didn't want to sleep on the balcony anymore. The next day, I showed up to school looking like trash, and when I told someone what had happened, they either didn't believe me or they would brush it off saying, "It's fine, you're alright now." After a few days, my mom confronted me about it and said that she was sorry that she didn't take my dream seriously, though I wasn't mad at all, just shocked. She said that she was just about to fall asleep but woke up to me screaming. She said that my screams were the most blood-curdling ones that she had heard in her life. But the scariest part is that I woke up for no reason. I just had the massive urge to look back. There was absolutely no noise when the man opened the window and was climbing in. I even asked my mother if she heard anything, and she said that no, it was absolutely silent. Who knows what the man would have done if I hadn't woken up, though I'm glad I didn't have to find out. The fact that also really shook me is that I had a dream of something similar happening about 3 weeks before it actually happened in real life. Though sadly, I don't know what happened to that man, if he was arrested or not. We never saw him again. But either way, I'm just glad that we moved out of that apartment sooner rather than later. I live in a relatively safe city in Scotland, though I have had several really odd or scary encounters since I moved here 4 years ago. I'm a short, 29-year-old woman, and I work in a pub, so I often get out of work late. On the weekends, I usually head home around 2 a.m. I never wear my headphones when headed home at night, so this particular night was no different than usual. Alarm set, doors locked and checked, said goodbye to my colleague, and then we went our separate ways to get home. I usually cross a grocery store car park to get home. It's well lit. And that night, something struck me as odd. There were a couple of cars that were parked there, which is normal, but something just felt off. I looked over my shoulder and clocked a guy in a hat walking a distance behind me. This wasn't weird, but I decided to keep an eye on him nonetheless. I exited the car park to the main road that I lived off of, but still, I had a good mile or so to go before I reached my flat. I checked over my shoulder again, and sure enough, this guy was walking the same direction as me. The distance between us was starting to close, so I decided to cross the road. I usually did at this point anyway. Looking over my shoulder, I was able to not only look for traffic coming, but was also able to keep an eye on him. I crossed the road and didn't bother to look back for a few minutes, assuming that he had stayed on the other side. But I began to hear footsteps approaching. I glanced over my shoulder and saw this guy was about 20 feet behind me. I had a soft drink and a glass bottle in my bag, and figuring I was overreacting, but better safe than sorry, I stuck my hand into the bag and I gripped the bottle. Another 45 seconds and this guy was close enough to touch me, but he slows to my pace and says, "Hello, how are you?" I ignore him and I don't respond. I long ago gave up on pretenses of being polite if I feel uncomfortable. A stranger's feelings matter less than my feeling of safety in any given situation. but he persists in talking to me. "Hey, are you going to work?" "No." I was being short with him. "Are you going home?" "Yes," I said coldly. "Do you live in this direction?" I just looked at him. He tried again. "Do you live off of this road? Where do you live? Do you live close by?" I didn't respond and slowed my pace, letting him walk on. I was still gripping the glass bottle, ready to hit him with it should he try anything. He tried to slow down so I would catch up with him, but I slowed down so much that I was barely walking. He was maybe 300 yards away at this point, and he simply stopped and turned around, watching me and waiting for him to catch up with me. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and I tried my phone. Of course my phone was dead. I figured it would last the walk home, but my dodgy battery had other ideas. Surprisingly though, I wasn't afraid. He had started walking again, but still quite slowly. He looked over his shoulder again after another minute, and I seized the opportunity. There is a path to a block of flats that was obscured by tall hedges, so I leapt behind them. I waited for nearly 10 minutes, never letting go of that bottle the entire time. I peeked around the hedges to make sure that he was there. I peeked behind bins and bus stops to make sure that he wasn't hiding in wait. But as far as I could tell, I had lost him. Maybe he didn't mean anything by this, but if you suspect a woman is afraid of you and she is walking alone at night, don't speak to her, it will not help. Especially don't ask her where she lives repeatedly. I was not drunk. I did not appear to be drunk or need any help. I was just walking home as I ordinarily would. I am, however, inclined to believe that he had bad intentions. I would rather be too cautious than not. My story begins in the summer of 2012. The first encounter happens before I'm leaving to go out of town for a summer study program. At the time, my mom didn't have AC, which meant that we would leave the front door open as we watched TV before bed. Not smart, but the breeze was nice and we were naive. My friend was over and she was coming to drop me off and we fell asleep, with the door open. We both woke up and discussed how we had weird dreams of a large man walking through the house. That's all we remember. The next thing you know, my friend is missing cash and cigarettes. Now, no one in the house smokes. It was my mom, my sister, and I. And we destroyed the house searching for both cash and cigs. We were terrified to tell my mom that we had forgot to shut the door. And my mom felt awful that my friend's cash went missing, so replaced it and we just forgot about it. I returned from the program about 2 months later. I was in my room, it was around 2 a.m., and my mom habitually fell asleep on the living room floor after working a long shift. I was texting a friend about a fight I was having with my boyfriend at the time, and then I hear something odd. My mom has jingles on the back door at this time, and now forever, because my sister and I at the time would sneak out and it's how she would catch us. I listened to the jingle start shaking, and I realized the back door is opening and closing. I start to freeze and I text my friend. I think someone just walked into my house. Now my mom's house is a ranch in a suburb. A small, cozy house and you learn everyone's footsteps. My mom's are light, quick and shuffled. The person walking through my house from the back door has heavy steps and they're trying to be quiet. I hear them open, look through the drawer, scatter metal in the kitchen. I worry. Did they just try to search for a knife? I don't have the courage to scream or face the culprit. I text my friend to call 911 immediately. She thinks I'm teasing or being dramatic. I stop texting and listen to the person go into my sister's room, and it's next to mine, and I can see in my window that they had flicked on her lights for what felt like forever. Thankfully, she was at her friend's having a sleepover. I begin to worry that they were going to open my door and come in my room next. They didn't. This whole time, my heart is racing and I'm frozen. They walk over to the living room, where my mom is still asleep on the floor. And from what I remember, I think they just watched her. Eventually they left. I immediately called my mom, who was feet away from me, and asked if it was just her walking around. She asked what. I immediately started to have a panic attack, screamed for her to run to my room, and frantically explained what happened. Finally, the police department called me because my friend did call them and ask if everything is okay. I shouted on the phone what happened, and they sent over the police. The police did a search around my house and saw footprints in the mud right outside of my bedroom window. They also asked if my mom and sister and I had partners or exes that may want to stalk us. We all hadn't at the time. I did admit to what had happened 2 months prior, and it could have been the same person preying on us. We were all so freaked out about the incident, but it doesn't end there. Months later, my mom again has fallen asleep with the TV on in the living room. By now, we have a paranoid system of making sure the doors and windows are all locked. We have thick window curtains too, but sometimes with the sun setting, you forget to put them down. My mom is half awake watching TV when she noticed a reflection in the window. She stares at it and thinks it's the TV glare, and then it waves at her. All of a sudden, I hear her screaming and stomping out the door. I chase after her. She is out the door, chasing a giant white van. The culprit got away, and my mom chased them. I had to yell at my mom that it probably was not the smartest to 1. Call the police immediately, 2. Open your door to them, and 3. Chase after her without any protection because who knows. But luckily, they left her alone. We never found out who it was, and since then, we have never had another incident that we know of. But whenever I visit home, there's always that eerie, unspoken paranoia. This story happened when my best friend and I were about 15 years old. We had to take an important exam at the end of the year, so we attended some private sessions in order to prepare. Because of this, we could only hang out on Saturdays after 5 p.m. We were at the mall, and after a bit of window shopping, she asked me to come outside in the park so we could smoke a cigarette. She had took it from her mother, but I didn't smoke and I never liked it. I accepted it as I was used to her requirement. So, we were in the mall's park, walking while she was smoking that cigarette. It was like 6 p.m., but it was already dark outside, as this happened in the wintertime. Let me describe you the place where we were. This was a large park full of trees and big rectangular-shaped bushes. On the side aisle, there were some restaurants, a full 10-meter gap, an exit to a dark street and to the parking lot, another big space and a place for skating. We thought that we were 100% safe, as we were still walking on the mall's property. We arrived near that strange exit when a man approaches us and asks for a cigarette. My friend tells him that she doesn't have any other cigarettes because she got it from someone else too. He seemed to be in his late 40s, was unshaved and wearing a red hood which almost covered his eyes. I tell him that we have to go, to which he responds with some incoherent words. We both knew that something was off, so we made some steps back. "Why are you so scared? I won't do anything to you," he said as he was approaching. Silence. "Don't worry, I've met a lot of girls like you," he said, and then he started to mumble other words that I couldn't understand. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know if he had any weapons. Behind us was a big bush. In front of us was him. If we chose to run in different directions, he would be able to catch at least one of us and probably take her with him. There weren't many people, but the ones who were passing by didn't seem to care about our terrified looks. My friend kept repeating that we were sorry and that we couldn't help him, and I think one of the people walking by heard her. Fortunately, another man who looked a lot more younger and stronger than the creep stopped and asked him why he was bothering us, but he wasn't given any response. My friend took the chance, crushed her cigarette with her foot as quickly as possible, and started running. I, as a complete idiot, remained frozen a few more seconds, and I looked in our savior's eyes, and then I started sprinting. We didn't stop running until we were sure that they couldn't see us anymore. Both of them left and we got back into the mall safely. and we never told anyone about this encounter. So, the creep from the mall, please, let's not meet again.